An ancient monastery in Austria hid a book written in human blood. It was called the Testament of the Forgotten Choir, and for centuries no one spoke its name aloud. The last monks of St. Verena sealed it beneath their chapel sometime in the early 1500s, when plague and heresy thinned both faith and memory. After that, the valley that held the monastery vanished from maps, as if the land itself wished to forget. More than 300 years later, in the summer of 1863, the Royal Institute of Antiquities sent a small expedition into those same Austrian foothills. The mission was routine, to inspect supposed Roman foundations exposed by a landslide. What the team found instead was the broken arch of a chapel door half buried in clay. Marked faintly with a symbol of 12 interlocking circles, the emblem once used by the Order of St. Verena, the site lay in a fold of mountains where wind seldom reached. Pines grew through shattered cloisters, and silence hung like mist over every stone. The expedition leader, Dr. August Verena, a careful scholar newly retired from teaching in Vienna, took immediate interest. His small team consisted of 2 young assistants and a hired digger from the nearby village of Hallstatt, Matthias Gruber, who warned them that the valley was known locally as the Singing Ground. Verena dismissed it as superstition. For a week they cleared ivy and charted foundations. Beneath the chapel floor they discovered a hollow space filled with stale, metallic-smelling air. When they lowered a lamp, it illuminated 12 niches cut into the stone. Each held a small wooden chest wrapped in rotted linen, and each lid was carved with markings that looked halfway between notation and scripture. Verena ordered the chests left sealed until drawings could be made, but curiosity is quicker than caution. That night one assistant, Paul Lenz, pried a chest open. Inside lay a dark volume the size of a hymnal. The pages were thick, sticky, and faintly luminous when the lamplight touched them. The script was Latin yet broken, like prayers that lost their grammar. Some lines repeated a single word dozens of times, others ran backward into nonsense. By morning the camp felt different. Matthias claimed to hear a low chanting underfoot. Verena noted the complaint in his journal, likely echo of wind through cavity. The others did not sleep. 5 days after the book's discovery, Paul developed a rash along his wrists and complained of humming inside his skull. The second student, Franz Heigl, built a crude pendulum to measure vibration in the air. Each time the book was opened, the needle turned slowly toward the north wall of the crypt. Verena began to believe the writing had been meant to be sung, not read. Letters to his wife show his unease. There is a stillness here that resists thought. The villagers will not speak the name Verena after dark. The text resembles music transcribed by something that never learned silence. Soon his field notes disintegrated into fragments, light beneath floorboards, Paul unwell, script breathing through paper. On August 2 Matthias fled downhill shouting that the monks are alive below. When rescuers arrived, the camp stood empty. Tents torn, equipment scattered, the pit half collapsed. The book was gone. Near the fire lay a brass crucifix twisted back on itself as if by heat or hand. The institute later called it a rockfall and closed the site. Officially, St. Verena's monastery was lost again. In 1891 railway engineers cutting through the valley uncovered remains of the camp, a rusted lantern, fragments of notebooks wrapped in oilcloth, and several pages bound in calfskin. The handwriting matched Verena's. These fragments, later catalogued as the St. Verena Papers, describe what happened after the disappearance. Verena wrote as though still alive somewhere beneath the earth, addressing his wife, "The others are gone. I hear them between sleeps. The song no longer needs words. It must be completed. The book is not written in ink, it writes itself with what it consumes." Every page bore reddish stains, later confirmed not to be any known pigment. Marginalia repeated one phrase, Verena cantus oblatus, the forgotten choir, when a clerk named Liesel Hartmann attempted to translate the fragments in 1892, she left a single line before vanishing: "Do not complete the harmony." It wakes those who remember the silence before the world. For decades the matter slept. Then, in 1937, dam builders blasting the valley exposed the upper chapel wall and a sealed lead cylinder containing another book. Intact, with the same cut-in musical lines. It was sent to Vienna and placed under the care of Dr. Elise Kroger at the Institute. Her report reads less like science, more like confession. The letters rise from the page as if pushed upward. Under magnification they appear translucent. When light passes through them I hear a tone none of the others notice. Weeks later Kroger resigned, suffering nervous exhaustion. At a sanitarium near Salzburg she whispered only one sentence to the nurses: "It sings under the skin." Historians eventually labeled the affair folklore mixed with clerical error. Yet fishermen on the dam reservoir say that when the water drops low, a sound like distant chanting moves through the valley floor. It is not loud, but those who hear it feel it vibrating behind their ribs. Among the Institute's files lies a final sheet, undated and unsigned, added long after Rainer's time. The writer refers to him in the present tense. He continues the work. The book is endless. Each reader adds a verse. When the last voice joins, the ground will open and the choir will be complete. By early autumn, the ruins of St. Verena's Monastery had become a quiet obsession for the entire archaeological team. Rain fell almost daily, soft and unending, turning the excavation site into a mire of slick mud and gray puddles. The mountain wind carried the scent of wet pine and something else, something that reminded Hartmann of a damp cellar where old parchment had rotted for centuries. Dr. Abel's condition worsened. He wandered the ruins at night, lantern in hand, murmuring verses no one could recognize. The men pretended not to notice, they were used to eccentric scholars. But the workers began refusing to enter the chapel vault after sunset. One claimed to hear singing beneath the floor, not from above or around, but below, as if the earth itself were breathing hymns. Hartmann documented it in his notebook but dismissed it as imagination fed by the cold and isolation. That night, however, as he wrote by candlelight, he heard the same faint sound, a chorus, distant but unmistakable, rising and falling like the echo of voices trapped under stone. He froze. It lasted only seconds, then dissolved into the whisper of rain against the window. The next morning, Abel did not come to breakfast. They found him kneeling in the chapel ruins, head bowed, whispering Latin phrases while his fingers traced invisible patterns into the dirt. When Hartmann approached, Abel turned to him and smiled weakly. "It's not madness, Friedrich," he said softly. "They're trying to finish the hymn. They never could while alive." Hartmann felt an unease that words could not define. He had seen men break under the weight of solitude before, but never with such serene conviction. A week later, beneath the eastern transept, they unearthed a sealed stone chamber. The air that escaped from the crack was cold enough to mist their breath, though the afternoon was warm. Inside, lying atop a crumbling altar, was the book. It was wrapped in a blackened cloth, stiff with age. The cover, once leather, had hardened into something like horn. The title was faint but legible, Testamentum Choria Bleedi, the Testament of the Forgotten Choir. When they opened it, the pages crackled like old leaves. Each sheet was dark, brittle, and soaked with a faint, reddish hue. The letters had been etched in a script that shimmered when light touched it. Not ink, Hartmann realized, but blood. Human blood, dried centuries ago. They carried it to the farmhouse and set it on a table covered with linen. Abel hovered over it like a man in prayer. He whispered to himself, tracing each line with trembling fingers, "This isn't a text." He murmured. It's music. It was meant to be sung. From that day, his descent was rapid. He refused food, spoke little, and spent nights transcribing the pages into modern notation. The others grew frightened. A young assistant, Lucas, begged Hartmann to lock the book away. Hartmann almost agreed, but curiosity won. Then came the letters. The first arrived at Hartmann's family home in Vienna, written in Abel's familiar scrawl. It was dated October 16, 1872, Friedrich, I've heard them. It's not imagination. When I follow the words with my voice, they answer. The air trembles like a choir returning to life. You must not fear this. You must listen, Hartmann never replied. Within a week, Abel vanished. His tent stood empty, his lantern cold, his notes scattered. No sign of struggle, only a single line written on the tent canvas in what appeared to be dried blood, Lux cadet ubi cantus order. Light falls where psalm rises. The police searched the woods for days but found nothing. The excavation was halted, the investors withdrew funding, citing hysteria. The monastery ruins were sealed under government order, declared unstable for human entry. Hartmann returned to Vienna. He tried to resume teaching, to lose himself in normal life, but the nights betrayed him. The sound of rain reminded him of chanting. His dreams were filled with the image of Abel kneeling before the altar, humming in tones too low for human voice. Months passed before a courier delivered a small package with no return address. Inside was a section of the Testament, carefully cut from the book, perhaps by Abel before he disappeared. It contained a fragment of Latin verse, written in that same glimmering red, Nos cantavimus donec Deus certus factus est, we sang until God became deaf. Hartmann felt something shift inside him then, a terrible fascination mixed with guilt. He wanted to burn it, but instead, he placed the page in a drawer and locked it away. That night, he dreamt of the monastery again, only this time, the chanting came from beneath his own bed. The following spring, a farmer from Salzburg wrote to the university, claiming he'd found the missing scholar. A pale man had been seen wandering the edge of the forest near St. Verena, carrying a lantern even in daylight, humming to himself. When Hartmann arrived, he found only the remnants of a camp, ashes, footprints, and several pages of music buried in the soil. They looked newer than the rest of the manuscript, as if freshly copied. Each page bore the same refrain, the light must fall again. Hartmann returned home with the pages wrapped tightly in cloth. He never told the university. He couldn't. The singing had followed him. Late one evening, as he sat in his study, he opened the drawer to burn the fragments. Before he could strike the match, the air grew heavy, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. The candle flames bent sideways, then, faintly, from somewhere beneath the floorboards, he heard the echo of the same hymn Abel had described. The melody rose, solemn and patient, until the walls seemed to pulse with it. Hartmann pressed his palms to his ears, but the sound wasn't external. It was inside him, in his heartbeat, in his breath. The room filled with a low vibration, almost mechanical, as if the world itself had begun to hum along. When it stopped, he found the candle extinguished, the room dark. Only the pages on the desk glowed faintly red, like the embers of something that had once been alive. He never spoke of it again, but his housekeeper would later tell the police that, for the next few weeks, Hartmann would sometimes be heard at night, humming quietly, in Latin, as though continuing a song that had never ended. For years, the testament of the forgotten choir was spoken of only in whispers among scholars of the occult. Most dismissed it as a fabrication, a story born from fevered minds and superstition. But every decade or so, a trace of it surfaced, a mention in a letter, a note in an archive, a single page turning up in some forgotten collection. Each time it did, something inexplicable followed: the sudden collapse of a chapel, the disappearance of a monk, the unexplained death of a collector. By the early 1900s, Hartmann's house had long been abandoned. Locals avoided it. They said that on winter nights, a faint light flickered in the upper window and a voice could be heard humming a hymn that didn't belong to any church. When the estate was finally sold, the new owners found the house empty, except for a locked drawer containing 2 brittle pages and a note written in an unsteady hand: "Do not finish the song." In 1911, a historian named Erich Wallner came across Hartmann's papers in the university archives. He was a rational man, trained in Enlightenment thought, and scoffed at any suggestion of the supernatural. But the story intrigued him. He was writing a book about medieval monastic orders and their hidden rituals, and St. Verena seemed the perfect case study. He tracked down the ruins, now little more than moss-covered stone foundations. The valley was empty, the forest thick and silent. Still, when Wallner stood among the ruins, he thought he could hear a faint vibration underfoot, a low resonance, like air trapped in a pipe. He convinced himself it was wind in the hollows. In an abandoned farmhouse nearby, he found a chest containing Abel's original notes. Most had faded to near illegibility, but one page stood out, a transcription of the Testament's hymn, written in careful notation. Wallner, being an amateur organist, decided to reconstruct the piece. That was his first mistake. He played it in his study late one night, a slow, mournful melody that rose in intervals never used in sacred music. The sound was beautiful, unsettlingly so, like something that had once been human but no longer remembered how to be. Halfway through, a dissonance emerged, 2 notes that should not coexist but somehow did, creating a vibration that set his lamp quivering. The air around him grew thick, humming faintly. When he stopped playing, he realized he was no longer alone. The reflection in the study window showed figures standing behind him, dozens of them, faint and colorless, their mouths open as though still singing. He turned sharply, but the room was empty. The only sound was the creak of the floor and his own heart hammering in his chest. He tried to dismiss it as exhaustion, but over the following nights, the song would return without his consent. The piano keys moved by themselves. Sometimes he awoke to find faint footprints on the floor, damp as though from bare feet. His final journal entry, dated February 4, 1912, read, "I have realized what they were. They were not monks, not anymore. They were the echoes of their own worship, trapped between verse and silence. And the hymn, it is not to God. It is to whatever answered when God turned away." 3 days later, Wallner's maid found him dead at the piano, hands frozen on the keys. The sheet music lay open to the final line of the hymn, unfinished. Decades passed. Europe changed, burned, rebuilt. St. Verena's Valley became little more than a footnote in local history. The war erased many records, even the exact location of the ruins was lost. Then, in 1984, a restoration project began in the same region. A team of historians, led by Dr. Katharina Weiss, aimed to preserve the last remaining medieval churches in Upper Austria. Among the project documents, a single page caught Weiss's eye. It bore the faint title Testamentum Cori Obliti. The archivist who handed it to her said it came from an anonymous donor. Weiss thought little of it, until she read the notation. The melody was eerily incomplete, ending mid-phrase as though the composer had run out of breath. The blood-colored ink had not faded with time. In fact, under lamplight, it seemed to pulse faintly. She began researching. Within weeks, her notes mentioned names long forgotten: Abel, Hartmann, Wallner, and a monastery that no longer existed on any map. The deeper she went, the more coincidences piled up. Her colleagues joked that she was haunted by a hymn. Then the recordings began, during late-night cataloging sessions, the tape recorders would capture faint sounds, a whisper, a hum, the creak of wood as though someone were walking behind her. She brushed it off as interference, but the noises grew distinct, rhythmic. It was music, soft, measured, ancient. One night, determined to prove her nerves wrong, she decided to play the reconstructed hymn on her laptop. The melody flowed slowly, each note carrying an unbearable sadness. Then came the unfinished part, the silence where the final phrase should have been. Without thinking, Weiss hummed what she felt should come next. A single, low vibration filled the room. The light bulb flickered. The temperature dropped. From the hallway came the sound of many voices exhaling at once. The recording stopped abruptly. When her assistant found her the next morning, the computer screen was black, yet faint music could be heard coming from the speakers. The sound file showed no playback, no activity, but the melody persisted until the power was cut. Weiss was alive, but she never spoke again. Her throat bore faint bruises, as though gripped by unseen hands. The investigation concluded nothing. The recording was archived under restricted access. But in 1991, a bootleg copy appeared on underground audio forums. It was short, barely a minute long, but listeners reported strange effects, faint headaches, nosebleeds, or an overwhelming sense of dread. Some claimed to hear whispered words layered beneath the music, repeating one Latin line, Lux cadet ubi cantus orator. To this day, no one has completed the hymn. The surviving fragment ends on a single unresolved chord, a breath suspended between worlds, but occasionally, in remote corners of the internet, a new version surfaces, always with one additional note, one new phrase, as if the song is rebuilding itself piece by piece. No one knows where these additions come from. A theory circulates among music historians that the Testament of the Forgotten Choir was never written by human hands, but dictated, received by those sensitive enough to hear what lies beyond silence. They say that when the final verse is sung, the veil between the living and the forgotten will dissolve completely, and the choir will rise once more to finish their song. In the mountains of Upper Austria, the ruins of St. Verena's Monastery still stand. Few visit now, though hikers sometimes return with stories of hearing faint chanting when the wind passes through the hollow stones. At dusk, a single light has been seen moving among the ruins, a lantern swaying gently, as if carried by unseen hands, and sometimes, if you listen long enough, you might hear the faint echo of voices below the ground. Not mourning, not praying, just waiting for someone to sing the last note.